Hi, this is Superintendent John Tague. I'm here to run through some information about the upcoming school budget. I'm going to run through sort of an abridged version of the slides that you may have seen before. All the slides are available with all of the details on our website, and so you can look through them here, but I wanted to give a general overview. We will be presenting the full presentation on Thursday, April 3rd at 6 o'clock in the GEMS library, and voting is Tuesday, April 8th from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. in the Georgia Elementary School gymnasium, the big gym. You'll see pictures on this screen of just the students in action doing the great things that they do, supported by your tax dollars, supported by the community, supported by the teachers, and supported by the administration of the school. So it's a wonderful place and lots of great opportunities for our students. Successes and highlights. We have an intervention program in the younger grades and throughout that provides the students with the support. And as a result of that, over 93% of our K-3 students met the literacy goal for reading on or above their grade level. Our students have exceeded the state average on the VT-CAP assessment. That's the statewide assessment. 4 of the 6 grades that we assess in the English language arts exceeded the state average. In math, 2 of the grades did, and in science, 1 of the 2 grades. We only test science in 5th and 8th grade. The 8th grade was above the state average, so doing well in the standardized testing. The band program continues to grow. Was at the Burlington Jazz Fest, has been featured on Weather at Your School. Just a great opportunity for kids, and it's really fun to listen to the band play. Our student attendance rate, 95.32%. That's an indication the kids love coming to school. They love the opportunities that are available for them. Just another measure of success at the school. And finally, our GEMS graduates continue to do well in the high schools that they attend after 8th grade. We hear great stories about our students. So we are preparing them well for their next opportunities. Our enrollment is relatively steady, slight increase in the elementary, potentially through increased enrollment in our pre-K program. Essentially, we've been fairly stable over the course of the last 3 years. Here's the numbers. The budget total, $18,405,403, is a 5.24% increase over the budget from last year. That is a per pupil cost of $14,826.04, and that is a 13.68% increase over the per pupil cost last year. And again, that increase, that percentage, is based on a bunch of numbers that we'll show you later on. It does not translate into a tax number. Top increases are the secondary tuition that we have no control over. That's set by the schools that we send our students to. They send us a bill, we pay it. And salaries and benefits. There have been an increase in the salary of our professional staff and our paraprofessional staff to help attract and retain teachers. That's reflected in the overall budget total. Decreases, our special education costs are actually down, and our nurse's office, we have reduced from 3 nurses to 2 nurses. So there's a pretty major reduction in that line item. What changed in this budget versus the one that was presented in town meeting day? We did experience some savings due to retirements. The original budget had some estimated savings for known retirements, and now that we have actual information, we're able to use some of that actual knowledge to reduce the budget. We did eliminate the mower from the budget. We believe we'll be able to purchase the mower this year with some savings from tax dollars that we already have. And lastly, we removed an additional custodian. It would have been good to have that custodian back in that we took out last year to provide additional service and maintenance for our school, but we've lived through this year without that position, and the board decided we could live another year with it, so we reduced that. So this is the total where the money goes, and you can see that about a third of the money goes to the high school, and the rest goes to within, and about a third of our students go to the high school, so it's relatively proportional. But you can see our transportation costs, buildings and grounds, the SU portion of things, what we pay for paras, pre-K, all the pieces. Working at GEMS, we have a large number of people that are either GEMS employees or Franklin West employees. We have our administrative team, classroom teachers, the interventionists, again, who provide that targeted support that has led to the success in our reading, and also in our statewide assessments. We have an academic coach who provides instruction for teachers to help improve their practice. Of course, we have our unified arts teachers, our nurses, guidance counselors, and our custodians. Our special educators, our speech and language pathologists, our special paraeducators, and our IT folks are FWSU employees. Sorry for me floating around, but trying to get so you can see things. So those are folks whose payroll comes through the FWSU, the Franklin West Supervisory Union Central Office, but who show up at Georgia every single day to work with the kids in Georgia. In terms of staffing, this is some data that I've shown throughout some of our pre-budget meetings. Put me over here. Sorry. So just it's a comparison, and this information came from the state of Vermont and their education profile earlier in the year. And it compares our Franklin West to schools that are the same size, the entire state, and then the Champlain Valley region, which is Franklin, Addison, and Grand Isle County. And in terms of the number of teachers per 100 students, we are considerably below the state average and pretty much in line with schools our size and in our region. Our number of leaders, which is the principals, is much lower than the other cohorts. Student services and support services are also lower. And again, I've said before that there's no magic to these numbers. The fact that we're lower than the state is a good thing, but I don't know if 10.3 turns out to be a good number compared to the rest of the world. But the point is that we are doing our best here in Georgia to keep our staffing levels at a reasonable level. Just want to spend a minute talking about the statewide funding system. Again, another one that I've talked about at board meetings as we prepared the budgets. Remember that Vermont has a statewide funding system. And so all of the requests for funding goes to the state. Every town says this is how much money we need, and that was what builds the education fund. And so to simplify that a little bit, just looking at 3 districts and not necessarily the 3 districts in Franklin West, but if one school is looking for $20 million and the next is 15 million and the third is 10 million, the total ask there is $45 million. So that's what your tax rate is based on. If in the next year, this district says, hey, we need another $500,000, and this district says, well, we can live with $250,000 less, the net increase, there is a net increase to the education fund of $250,000. So all of these schools are going to see some level of tax increase. The district that reduced their spending would see a tax increase. The district that stayed the same is going to see a tax increase, and the district that increased their spending is going to see a tax increase, but probably not as much of a tax increase proportional to the $500,000. So when all of the money goes into one pool, your tax rate depends on a lot of different things. So there's a couple of ways that your tax rate can change. More spending across the state is going to increase your tax rates. When we pay for things that aren't necessarily instructional items like the school lunch program or PCB testing or Act 166 pre-K spending, those would increase the education fund, which then increases our tax rate. When your property value changes compared to the rest of the state, that's the property, what is the letter? That's the property value that we use in the comparison. I'll get to it later on. And then if we have a change in the number of students compared to the state, our students are weighted. So different students have different sort of weights depending on how difficult it might be to educate them. And so we could have students move into the district, we could have students move out of the district, and some students may have more weight in the weighting system than what we hit, then that would change our property values, or that would change your tax rate. Just want to calculate the tax rate for you and you make some comparisons. So this number is $17,799,256. That is the education spending. That's the amount that we ask the state for. That's the amount that would be in the ed fund. It's our total spending minus any offsetting revenues that we might have. As your education spending goes up, your tax rate could definitely go up. Our pupil count last year had 1,258.94 pupils. This year had 1,200.54 pupils. That's a decrease. Doesn't mean that we lost students, as we showed you earlier. It means that potential weighting of the students and the method that they use to weight students changed. And so that's going to impact our tax rate. The spending per equalized pupil is simply the education spending divided by the pupil count, and that gets us to $14,826.04, which is about $84 a day is what we spend on our students. And that $84 a day gets students to and from school, gets breakfast, gets lunch, gets math, reading, writing, science, social studies instruction, PE, art, after school activities, all of that for about $84 a day per student. So I know I pay about $40 when I send my dog to daycare for the day, and he gets a fenced-in yard for that. So just to relatively give you what that cost breakdown might be. The property yield is $8,553. That's a number that's set by the legislature to make sure that they can gather enough money to pay basically the ed fund bill. That is a lower number than it was last year. So when the yield goes down, the property tax rate goes up. The common level of appraisal, that's the one I was looking for the three letters for a minute or two ago, the CLA. It went up this year by quite a bit. So when the yield went down, the CLA went up, sort of a little bit neutralizes each other. But ultimately what you do is you take your property yield, you use all these to get to the tax rate, and the tax rate is 1.8015, which is an increase of 6.62%. So again, you see this number 13.68 is going to show up on the ballot, but your tax rate is about half that tax rate increase. Average homeowner in Georgia, based on an average price of a house, would see about a $472 increase in their taxes in this FY26 proposal. Where does Georgia stand statewide in FY24 before they changed the tax system, the weighting system? Georgia was 112th out of 120 school districts in terms of their per pupil cost. In FY25, after the change in the weighting, Georgia got closer to the middle, but still in the bottom half of per pupil spending across the state. This number is going to maybe about the same place. So we used to be very low in the pack, and now we're sort of towards the middle of the pack in this recalculation error. So just again, it's your school board trying to get the maximum value for your dollar. And Georgia is amongst the 17 schools in the state that tuition their high school students. Georgia's number 10 on the list, so there are 7 schools that spend less than Georgia, and there are 9 schools that spend more. So again, right about in the middle of the pack. Same calculation. This is maybe the formula that you're more used to seeing. We take our total expenditures. This is the number that will show up on the ballot, that $18,405,403. We subtract away our offsetting revenues. That gets us to the education spending, which is the number we saw on the previous slide. Pupil count, we've seen that. We do the ed spending divided by pupil count. That gets us our per pupil. Okay, that's that $84 a day number. Divide that by the yield. That gets us our equalized homestead rate. We get a discount because of an act last year, so we get to subtract 14 cents. And again, that has to do with the way our per pupil count numbers changed. So we got about a 14-cent deduction there. That gets us to your discounted homestead rate, which is $1.58. And then the last is to divide by the CLA, the common level of appraisal, which is actually up a little bit from last year, but that's part of a statewide reevaluation. Gets you to your actual homestead rate of $1.80.15, which is that 6.62% increase. This is what it actually means in terms of your house. A $450,000 house would see about a $503 increase in your taxes. And you can see, based on what your home value is, what that would be. This does not include income sensitivity, where you pay based on your income rather than on the value of your property, but that's sort of taken care of automatically by you filling out a form on your taxes. The governor has talked about, with all of the reform efforts around education and new number of school districts, and all of the work that they're doing in Montpelier, that he's talked about buying down the tax rate by adding $77 million basically towards the education fund. So using money to buy down the rate. If he did that, this is a number that the House Ways and Means has used as $8,705 for the yield, and that would be the relative change. And I'm just going to flash back to the previous one, so that $503 increase, what we believe will happen right at this point, could go down as low as $417 if the House Ways and Means is able to use that $77 million that the governor's talked about. All of our numbers are approximate because the yield is not set until May or June, and that's one of the ones that has a big determination of your tax rate. So what you see on the ballot is that Article 2, shall the voters of the school district approve the school board to spend $18,405,403, which is the amount that the school board has determined necessary for the ensuing school year. That results in a per pupil education spending of $14,826.04, which is 13.68% higher than the per pupil education spending for the current year. And remember that 13.68 is not a tax increase. The 6.62 is the actual tax increase, which is pretty darn close to what the state average is. So what we hope is that you'll be able to vote on April 8th in person at GEMS, or that you contact the town clerk in advance to get an absentee ballot to vote. If we have a successful vote, then we can move forward with 25-26 school year planning. And if not, then we'd have to come back to the voters again. So we thank you for listening. I thank you for listening and supporting our students. It says vote in person tomorrow, but really vote in person on Tuesday, April 8th. Unless you're watching this on April 7th, then that's the actual date. And please reach out to me or to your school board if you have any questions. Thanks for listening.